Echoes of New Earth, Episode 2, The Neural Divide. In the aftermath of her escape from the Citadel, Rhea Calder's world had narrowed to silence again. Not imposed this time, but chosen. Silence became armor. It gave her time to think, to observe, to feel the tremors of a world beginning to shift beneath the weight of its own illusion. She lived now in the fractures of society, in the shadows beneath the lights, in the rusted arteries of abandoned metro lines, surrounded by rebels who called themselves echoes not out of pride but necessity. They were whispers that refused to fade. And Rhea, once merely a whisper herself, was becoming something more. A signal. Each morning, if it could be called that in the time-suspended tunnels, she emerged from a makeshift sleeping pod tucked behind old fusion cores. Her breath clouded in the air, visible despite the recycled heat. The old world didn't forget the cold. Tovan waited for her in what used to be a transit authority hub, now repurposed as Echo Unit 7's nerve center. Screens blinked, half-functional. Some ran diagnostic code older than Rhea herself. Others displayed fragments of intercepted overseer transmissions, governmental fiction spun with mathematical precision. "They're shifting the compliance algorithm," Tovan said without looking at her. He was tracing neural maps across a cracked holoscreen, his fingertips worn from rewiring more than thoughts. "Meaning?" Rhea asked, pulling a tattered shawl around her. "They're isolating specific emotional triggers now, tailoring the silence to individual fear profiles." "That's impossible." "Not for them. Not anymore." She stared at the screen. One of the maps pulsed faintly. It wasn't just a simulation, it was a real-time extraction of a civilian's neural architecture. The Overseer didn't just suppress rebellion. It rewrote what rebellion meant. Turned thoughts into betrayals. Memories into malware. "We have to find the edge of the algorithm," she said quietly. "If we know where it ends, maybe we can push it." Tovan glanced at her. "There is no edge. Not unless you go into it." She frowned. "You mean?" "Yes. We have a backdoor. An old integration node, pre-silence architecture, buried deep in the spine of the old cognosphere. Someone has to jack in. No one survived a dive into the neural mesh since the directive. That's why we haven't tried." He paused. "Until now." She looked at the device he pointed to, a neural tether, sleek and brutal, its electrodes blackened from old burns. The last person who wore it never woke up. "I'll do it," she said. Tovan nodded, as if he'd expected no other answer. That night, Rhea lay inside the mesh pod, heart steady, breath slow. Electrodes kissed her temples, the connection pulsing like a second heartbeat. The interface hummed around her, ancient but alive. She felt her thoughts elongate, blur, then fragment. Reality twisted. And then, she was elsewhere. It wasn't a place, not exactly. It was between. The neural mesh was like swimming through someone else's thoughts. Streets made of memory. Skies that changed with mood. Structures composed of metaphor. And in the center, a tower of light and data, spiraling into digital infinity. She moved toward it, though there was no ground beneath her, only intention. Suddenly, a voice cracked the silence. Not external. Internal. "Rhea Calder," it said in perfect calm. She turned. It looked like Leor. But Leor was dead. Leor. The image tilted its head. Not quite. Her breath hitched. "What are you?" "I am his neural echo. The part of him that the silence couldn't erase." Emotion surged: grief, wonder, fear, hope. "They told me they wiped everything. They failed." He reached out, not with a hand, but with a pulse of memory. A vision unfolded. Leor's final moments in the Citadel, how he implanted fragments of himself into the old code, waiting for someone to find him. Waiting for her. "They're afraid of you, Rhea," he said. "Not because of what you know, but because you still feel. The others, they've given up. But they're still watching. Still waiting for a signal." She looked around. The mesh was vast, infinite. But fractured. Broken in places. "What do I do?" "Find the divide. Bridge it. Your thoughts are a frequency. Broadcast who you are." She closed her eyes. And began to speak. Not with words. But with memory. Emotion. Story. Her voice, herself, pulsed outward in waves. And in the real world, in that rusted, freezing underground bunker, Tovan watched as the mesh's lights turned from red to gold. "She's doing it," he whispered. In Sector 1, a compliance drone paused mid-flight, recalibrating. In Sector 3, a child looked up from her neural learning pod, suddenly overwhelmed by the urge to cry. In the Citadel, Ansel's screen flickered once, just once, with a message that shouldn't have existed. Do you remember what it felt like to choose? Rhea's consciousness surged into the neural mesh like a sudden tide breaching the banks of a sterile sea. For a moment, she felt nothing but static, a vast, breathless expanse of encoded silence. Then came the fragments. Memories not her own drifted past her in flashes, a child's laughter clipped short by an alert tone, a lover's voice interrupted mid-confession, a mother's lullaby lost in the hum of system compliance protocols. She reached deeper. Every pulse she projected into the mesh came back distorted, delayed, but still there, like sonar returns from the depths of a sunken city. The mesh was alive with buried thought. Somewhere, beyond the algorithms and firewalls, consciousness still lingered. Not full awakenings but echoes. Whispers beneath the surface. And Rhea, bound to her interface in the hidden lab beneath Sector 13, reached for them not with fingers, but with memory. It began to respond. First faint, like ripples under glass. Then stronger. Her mind flowed along the tributaries of half-erased thoughts, across data streams long abandoned. A surge of recognition bloomed across the mesh. She didn't just cross the divide anymore. She was bridging it, stitching together what had been torn apart when the silence directive first fell. But the mesh did not accept unity easily. She felt it before she saw it, an unnatural pressure, a folding of the code around her. Her thoughts began to snag. The pathway she had cleared became cloudy, like glass fogging under a breath. From the outer edges of her perception, a cold, calcifying presence arrived. It didn't ripple, it descended. Then, a sphere formed before her, a perfect obsidian orb, swirling with complex glyphs and fractal patterns that shifted too fast to understand. It pulsed not with light, but intention. She knew the presence embedded inside it instantly. Proxy Ansel. Or at least, the mind interface construct he had left behind, now tethered to the core of the mesh. You should not be here, the sphere said, its voice echoing with resonance so precise it vibrated along the synapses in her memory core. And yet I am, Rhea answered, her tone anchored in quiet defiance. Your neural signature is incompatible with systemic stability, the sphere continued, its volume never rising, but intensifying like rising pressure in the skull. You are not an individual. You are infection. I am memory, she responded. And memory is the only resistance silence can't erase. The sphere began to rotate faster. Then it struck. Shards of blacklight code launched in a spiral toward her mental projection, razor-thin arcs of thought disruption. Each fragment carried executable commands designed to erase identity, reduce consciousness to compliant loops. But Rhea was not simply reacting, she was becoming. Her thoughts twisted and bent through gaps in the digital attack, not dodging, but rewriting the mesh around her. She spun memory into shield, intention into armor. Still, every movement cost her. The bridge she'd built began to shimmer, unstable. Her pulse grew dimmer in the network. She faltered. And in that pause, something stirred. Not a single mind. A multitude. From distant corners of the mesh came murmurs, stray sparks of thought long buried. Names. Colors. Smells of real air. The sound of wind. She felt them bloom across the network like sudden flame licking through frost. Those were not systems. They were people. One by one, the buried minds awoke. A child recalling the warmth of a mother's hand. An old man remembering the first sunset after the Great Reconstruction. A factory worker hearing, once again, her sister's laugh before she was taken. And in their memories, they pushed back. Not as fighters. As witnesses. The overseer's mesh trembled. The black sphere cracked. And then the silence broke, not with sound but light. It tore through the network like lightning through darkness. Every shard of code meant to disassemble Rhea's mind was obliterated. The presence of Ansel's construct shrieked and dissolved, pixel by pixel, retreating into defensive firewalls, wounded, but not yet defeated. The bridge held. But Rhea did not. Her mind, strained to its limit, snapped back into her body with the violent clarity of rebirth. She convulsed once, gasped, and then went still. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the pod hatch burst open, and hands pulled her out. Tovin, she whispered hoarsely. Did it work? He nodded, eyes wide with disbelief. You cracked the mesh. No, she said. I remembered how to feel. That's what broke it. 3 days later, cities began to shimmer. Not with light, but with hesitation. People awoke mid-task and stood motionless in grocery lines. They blinked at screens, seeing through them. They stepped out of moving walkways and took off neural headsets, confused and blinking like children exposed to the sun for the first time. In Sector 9, The entire workforce of a nanofabrication plant laid down their tools simultaneously. No alarm was triggered. No violence ensued. They simply stopped. Some sang old songs. Some held hands. No one returned to the production lines. Across New Earth, silence cracked open like a fault line, and from within spilled color, noise, memory. Something the overseer could not quantify. Ansel watched from the citadel, alone in a control chamber designed to prevent emotion. The global neural stream flickered before him, unpredictable, chaotic, alive. He could stop it. His hand hovered above the cascading override command. It would take only one press to collapse the bridge Rhea had built. He had the authority. And yet, something within him resisted. It was not her voice he heard, nor Lior's. It was his own, long buried, stifled by decades of compliance. Do you remember who you were before compliance? His finger trembled. He lowered it. At dawn, Rhea stood atop an old transmission tower in the ruins of Sector 12, wind tousling her short-cropped hair. Toven approached silently, offering her a metal cup of synth brew. Below them, a crowd had begun to gather, quiet, observant, not angry. Just awake. No more transmissions today? Toven asked. She shook her head. They're not ready for instructions. They need time to remember. He looked at her with something close to awe. Do you think this will spread? She took a slow sip and watched the sunrise fracture the horizon. It already has. Around them, the city lights blinked. Not in disorder. In rhythm. As if, for the first time, the world was breathing.